The classic comedy Miss Congeniality has a montage of beauty pageant contestants, one after another, answering the question, what is the most important thing our society needs now? They all give the same answer: world peace. It's a long-running joke that the notion that beauty queens who are young can have anything to do with resolving long-standing geopolitical tensions. That idea itself is naive, it's said, or even slightly offensive. Enter this year's Miss Universe. If you've been following the news this week, you may have heard that Israel is hosting this year's Miss Universe competition. Of course, in the shadow of unassailably ugly underbelly of anti-Semitism that Dara Horn so vividly captures in her book, People Love Dead Jews, greater than average controversy was expected and delivered. South Africa sought to recall and then renounce its contestant when she defied their call to boycott and went ahead with competing anyway. Malaysia and Indonesia did not send contestants, and even American Jews were troubled when contestants from around the world were allowed into Israel at a time when the country is locked down against Omicron, and most of us cannot go. None of that is surprising. But this year's contest is surprising, precisely for the way that its competitors, in their own way, represent some small but significant steps towards, yes, world peace. Not the full-blown war is over if you want it type, but small glimmers of cooling tensions that leave room for possibility. Amy Spiro writes in the Times of Israel, for the first time ever, Bahrain, which normalized relations with Israel last year, is sending competitors to the global competition. Morocco, which also launched diplomatic ties with Israel last year, is participating for the first time since 1978. And once there, their observations about Israel were also surprisingly warm. Miss Morocco reflected on how many people she had met in Israel who shared with her that their parents or grandparents were Moroccan, and how that made her feel that they shared something in common. Miss Turkey shared, I didn't think for a second that I would boycott Israel. I'm very happy to be here. The Israeli people are so kind and amazing. What do we make of the real tension between real and rising anti-Semitic and anti-Israel sentiment and this picturesque glimpse of coexistence? One approach is to discount it entirely as a manufactured montage unreflective of the world that we actually live in. Bechol dor vador omdim aleinu. In every generation, they rise up against us is as true today as it ever has been. No sweet sound bites can make a dent in that. Another approach is to breathlessly embrace these lovely sentiments as a sign that anti-Semitism, it's not so bad. See, look, they like us. They really like us. Of course, while tempting, neither of those approaches gets it right. Their certainty lacks complexity, and complexity is the currency of our hour. Yes, anti-Semitism rages, and we must be vigilant and we must be wary. And yes, if we look, there are reasons to hope for more. Neither story is complete without the other. That's the true power of Miss Universe today. An idea that Micha Goodman speaks to so powerfully is reflected in its concrete example of what it might look like to not end the conflict, not solve the conflict, but, as he says, to shrink the conflict. Obviously, Miss Universe does not end anti-Semitism. It doesn't solve anti-Semitism. But again and again, the contestants are using their global platforms to shrink anti-Semitism. Let me share with you one such moment that took my breath away. A few days ago, as many who visit Israel do, the Miss Universe contestants visited Yad Vashem. Miss Puerto Rico, Michelle Colon, stepped forward, surprising other contestants and staff as she shared, "My great-grandfather actually escaped from the Holocaust. His family members, his sisters, his brothers, even their daughters were killed in concentration camps, especially Auschwitz." She later tweeted out a photo of her and Miss Israel Noah Kochva holding hands beneath a wall covered with photos of Holocaust victims there. "My great-grandfather, Rodolfo Cohn," she shared, "moved to the Caribbean and met Dorila Thomas, my great-grandmother, an empowered woman, descendant of slaves. Together, they formed a solid family, full of love, built on empathy and resilience." In this moment of revelation, her story and Israel's story became one of shared destiny. For countless Puerto Ricans and others around the globe, she opened up a new window into Israel and the Jewish people. You may be thinking, okay, so beauty queens with global platforms can make a small difference in shrinking anti-Semitism. So what? What does it have to do with me? Well, I'd like to argue with you this morning that while none of us can solve anti-Semitism, all of us have the power these beauty queens have to shrink it. No makeup or ball gown required. 2 Shabbatot ago, I was profoundly moved when a gentleman who had been sitting toward the back of our congregation came up after services and introduced himself. He's here with us this morning. He said to me, "My name is Ed Gaskin," and I told him that I had read his powerful article, which he titled, "After the Tree of Life Tragedy, I went to Shabbat services and never stopped." Told him how meaningful it was to me that he had done that act of solidarity and continued to show up for the Jewish people. In that article, he reflected on how after the shooting he felt a deep sense of wrongness. After the tragedy, he said, "I went to temple out of a desire to be on the right side of history." What happened then, though, surprised him. "As a conservative Christian," he wrote, "I realized that I had not read, prayed, sung, or heard anything with which I didn't agree." He concludes, and he amplified his experience By writing, I'm proposing that Christians in general and African American Christians in particular attend Shabbat services in a show of solidarity and a small step towards understanding and transformation of our shared destiny. It's something that even at the height of the pandemic, he himself continued to do, even when it meant that, like so many of us, he had to do it via live stream or Zoom. He showed up. And so it was that I was deeply moved when he showed up for us at Shabbat Alive 2 weeks ago and again today. At Shabbat Alive, he shared that he had actually expanded his solidarity. As hate crimes against the Asian community have risen throughout this past year, he had decided to bring 8 boxes of food to 8 different Buddhist temples. At first, he said he was uncomfortable with all of the statues that he saw there, but visiting 8 different Buddhist temples, he said, was important. Some Buddhists wore robes, while others wore suits and ties, each place and space different. Time and proximity broke down his barriers. And then something else happened. The repeated visits enabled not only him to see them differently, but they, him. Personal connection created possibility. He concluded his article on that experience, anyone can make a difference, and everyone can try. Obviously, anti-Semitism has rotted hearts for thousands of years and is not contingent on what we do. And yet, in the spirit of Micha Goodman's Torah, just because all hearts cannot be swayed does not mean that none can. Relationships matter. Rabbi Chiel Alav HaShalom showed us that a generation ago with his tireless work with the Catholic Church to break down age-old hatreds, turning them into partnership and respect. If we want to shrink anti-Semitism, we've got to do what Rabbi Chiel did, what Ed Gaskin and the beauty queens do, open ourselves up to connections, to relationships beyond ourselves, relationships that humanize the other and us. We can hope for more Ed Gaskins, or we can be like Ed Gaskin, bringing, if not world peace, more peace to our world. Shabbat Shalom.